Welcome to the ChangeMakers Podcast, produced by City Current and powered by Higginbotham Insurance and Financial Services.
This show shares personal stories and insight from those who are leading by example, fueling positive change and making a difference so we can learn and do the same.
We cover life lessons, business advice, passion, and purpose.
Now here's your host, Jeremy Park.
Higginbotham Insurance and Financial Services is proud to power the ChangeMakers Podcast. We're a people-first company that protects what matters most, the families, businesses, and trailblazers that keep our community going. As one of the nation's top independent insurance firms, Higginbotham is a single-source solution for business insurance, employee benefits, HR services, and personal insurance that's customized for you. We're here to serve you, the people you care about, and your community. Call 866-377-1959 or visit higginbotham.com.
Welcome to the ChangeMakers Podcast, produced by City Current, powered by Higginbotham. I'm your host, Jeremy Park. On this episode, we're diving into faith, public policy, health and healthcare, community development, and so much more. That's why we're honored to have with us our good friend, Dr. Kenneth Robinson. Most of you know him as President and CEO of United Way of the Mid-South. He recently announced his retirement, and that's why we're so excited to be able to honor him and his legacy and talk about the future with our good friend, Dr. Robinson. So how are you doing, buddy?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much, Jeremy. I appreciate the opportunity. I'm delighted to talk about my past and my future. I appreciate you.
Well, you've done so much for the state of Tennessee, for Memphis and the Mid-South. We have a lot to talk about, and there's so many different sides to your story, which is really cool. But we always like to start with a little bit of the childhood. So talk about where you grew up. Give us a little bit of your childhood.
Oh, my goodness. A long time ago, 70 years ago, I was born in Nashville, Tennessee, not too terribly far from Memphis. And I was blessed to be born into a family of teachers, of public school educators. My parents were brilliant individuals who had been educated at Tennessee State University. And for their undergraduate degrees, my dad went on to get a master's at Howard. My mom, a master's at Fisk University. And the two of them had grown up in generational poverty. My dad, the son of an itinerant United Methodist preacher. My mom, the daughter of really what we would call a washerwoman, a woman who was a housemaid out in the more affluent sections of Nashville. But the two of them understood the value of education, and they instilled in their children, my one brother and I, the importance of aspiring and the hope that education would be the path for us to achieve and to go farther than they. And they did an extraordinary job all of their lives. Our home was the after-school classroom for so many students at historically Black and at that point segregated Black community schools in Nashville. And so I grew up in that cocoon of a highly educated, education-forward family. But the other element was really critical because, as I hinted a moment ago, my dad, who was a preacher's kid, and my mom, who was really steeped in her faith, brought us into the culture and the context of the church and the critical, pivotal role that the church played in the lives of, again, the African-American community in Nashville. And so somewhere between that connection and the interaction between my faith and what I learned in church and my goals in terms of education, I was being formed and fashioned into whatever I became by the time I went off to college. But what a wonderful, marvelous background I had.
What's one family tradition that as you look back really stands out? And it can be around the holidays, it can be the dinner table, but what's one family tradition that puts a smile on your face when you look back?
Scrabble. And for families that know the fun of table games, I think even now, as you ask me that, Scrabble really incorporated so many things, didn't it? It was the understanding of language and words and the intersection, but it also, for our family, was a time for the four of us to sit around the family table, to engage, to really compete. And I think probably there was the genesis of my learning to compete, even against my older brother and even my parents. But it was family values, education, time together. And we did that consistently. That was the fun. I never learned how to play spades like a lot of kids growing up, but I knew how to play Scrabble. And my capacity to turn a few words, and it grew over the years pretty much from that foundation. But it spoke to so much. It was the way in which we could sit around the den and talk about things of faith and talk about elements of our community. And my parents in the 60s, when I was still in the single digits of age, were very active in the civil rights era in Nashville, and were very determined, certainly for their younger son, with my brother being 7 years older, but for me, to create a very different existence and experience. And as deep and heavy as those elements were in the early 1960s in Nashville, we still had those wonderful, marvelous family traditions of fun, communication, open sharing, and travel together as much as we could afford back in those days.
What were your dreams growing up? And this will play out obviously later in the conversation. We talk about healthcare and faith on your end, but what were your dreams when you were younger?
Well, what was quintessentially important for me was the narrative that my parents shared with me. I was a very premature baby. I was very, very ill at birth, and the potential for my surviving those first few weeks and months apparently was pretty tenuous, and my parents were informed of that. But I did have the blessing, Jeremy, of having been born at Hubbard Hospital of Meharry Medical College. And again, given the days, it was the only place really in Nashville that I would likely have been born. It was a segregated hospital, but the physicians there were the creme de la creme, just extraordinarily highly trained physicians. And the chairman of the Department of Pediatrics became my pediatrician. And the rest of the story really led me through many, many times in the hospital, much opportunity to see the expertise and the caring of those exceptional African-American physicians. I grew also to love medicine and to see it not only as a means to an end for sick children, but really as an affirmation, again, of what highly educated African Americans could achieve and then give back to the communities and they serve. And Meharry and Dr. E. Perry Crump, a legendary figure at Meharry Medical College, really restored me to health. I was a little short guy. If you see me today, I'm still not a towering figure, but I had significant stunted growth, and they brought me back to health, my allergies, my asthma. Dr. Crump was the first board-certified NIH-trained pediatric allergist in the nation who was African American. And so that gave you a sense of, again, that cocoon. I love using that word because I grew up there. And as I saw those luminaries, I really aspired to be a physician. And I felt called to be a physician and to serve my community wherever that would end up being in the way that I was served by the physicians at Meharry. And it really propelled me to excel as much as I could in medicine and to be prepared for what I thought the Lord was going to do for me. And you're hearing already two tracks of my life: a calling based on the faith that I was deeply rooted in, and the preparation for medicine, which I also felt that God had placed upon my life.
Yeah, this is why I love the ChangeMakers podcast, is just hearing these stories and the experiences and how they really like completely shape the trajectory of your life and career. A couple more questions in terms of childhood, and then we'll talk about, college and such and transitioning. But any advice or words of wisdom, things that your parents used to tell you often that now stick with you? So, anything these young formative years as they were pouring into you that you still carry with you today?
Well, I certainly think that the overall and the overarching and underlying message was that I could do anything. And that was reinforced continuously. Of course, I had the privilege of middle class by the time I came along, but the exposures, the experiences that my parents afforded me were intentionally formed to reinforce that I could do anything. Given the fact, if I could retreat for a moment, that my mother grew up in that level of poverty, went to Tennessee State. She was so poor when she was accepted to her master's program at Fisk, she didn't know that her scholarship at that time would be granted for 2 years. So she was the first person ever to finish her master's in English in 1 year, because she said, I may not have the money for a second year. And my father, who had picked cotton and laid railroad ties and had done all sorts of odds and ends as a job just to make it through Tennessee State, went on, served in the Army, but went to Howard and was Phi Beta Kappa, top in his class. And so they came back and served in that segregated system, but pushing me, believing that their son would have other opportunities and other experiences, and that life would be different by and by. And that literally, if I prepared myself, I could do anything. And that was an endearing message, and I'm grateful to them for that, because it stuck. And so much so, when we talk about my wife, who met me in college, she thought that when I came up there as a freshman, that I was a stuck-up little guy from the South. And to some extent, she was probably right, because I had this indefatigable sense that I literally could achieve, and I was driven. My parents helped drive me to whatever I became. Probably it's not much, but they pushed me on this trajectory.
Well, you've got to have drive and confidence to go to Harvard, and we'll talk about that. One more question. Give us a little bit of a snapshot about your relationship with your brother.
Yeah, very interesting. My brother, one sibling, 7 years older than I, preceded me at Harvard. And so Jim was in his day, part of that early vanguard, 1964, when institutions such as Harvard were really affirmatively seeking out extraordinary students of color. And Jimmy similarly was driven as I. I had a head start on Jimmy as a younger teenager. I was working very actively pursuing this issue of health and supporting the community. I was working with persons who at the time we said they were mentally retarded. That was the terminology. And I became the first national president of an organization then called the Youth National Association for Retarded Children. It's not obviously the terminology we use today. I traveled across the water. I spoke in Brussels. I was a member of 2 presidential commissions in the Nixon administration, interestingly, for the employment of the handicapped, as we call them, and mental retardation. And so Jimmy didn't have those experiences, went on to Harvard, and for him, Harvard was an early exposure to a very different group of individuals. He did well, studied math, graduated But having matriculated in 1964, you can imagine 1968 was at the height of the Vietnam War, and Jimmy was forced to make some other decisions in life and became a teacher. And I think Jimmy was very pleased about his life. He's passed on now. I had a very different trajectory when I entered college in 1971. Things were stabilizing on the global front. I had a very low draft number, but I'm very grateful that I was not drafted, and they ended the draft 6 months after I turned 18. So my experience in life took a different turn, and I would say had some breadth and depth that my brother never had the opportunity.
Was his going to Harvard something that attracted you to Harvard? What made the choice to go to Harvard on your end?
Well, having heard a little bit about my hyper-focused mother and dad, I think the legacy of one brother having gone to Harvard certainly opened the door for another. And I think Harvard was interested in us as a family. And I, too, was recruited, as you might imagine, in those late 60s, early 70s. So that's another whole conversation about the value of an affirmative approach and affirmative action to seeking and finding and then promoting and elevating and providing opportunity for individuals of color in those days to have access to those vaunted halls of academia in places like Harvard.
When you look at the experience, give us, what that was like, because, as you mentioned, the culture is different, obviously. And so, but you met your wife, like so many amazing storylines out of it. So talk about the experience of Harvard and what was that like for you?
Well, I think what was most important for me was to find myself in that Harvard environment. And as you've already indicated and given me the opportunity to expound upon, my life was African-American culture, and it was about the Black church. And so interestingly, having met my wife, who was a big-time sophomore when I got there as a freshman, and she was from New York City. Interestingly, having grown up, however, in the projects and public housing in the Bronx, of parents who were deep in their faith, 2 deacons in their church, we had things in common. But for me to find myself at Harvard, I found myself in the African-American community in Cambridge, Massachusetts, gravitated to a marvelous church, St. Paul AME Church, led by an iconic visionary of a young preacher who saw denominational ministry very differently. It was culturally relevant and very Afrocentric. And I went there on my first weekend at Harvard and never left. And you can imagine that's going to fuel and propel some of the other narratives in my life. So I found myself there. I became the director of the choir there while I was at Harvard College and then Harvard Medical School. My friends teased me that they never knew whether I was going to ever pass my exams because I'd be spending all day on Sundays at the church. But that rooting and grounding in my faith, very critical while I was commuting from Harvard's campus to the church there in Central Square in Cambridge. And the integration of that, the interrelationship between what I was doing in real life in that community, in that church, and my academic pursuits at Harvard College. I was a pre-med, I was a biology major. I finished pretty well with honors from Harvard College, knowing and still believing steadfastly that I was called to be a physician. So very much focused there, but my orientation was couched in the context of the culture of my faith and the community that I would one day go back to serve.
Talk about then going to Harvard, continuing your education for your doctorate of medicine.
Yeah, it was a logical progression for many people that were Harvard undergraduates who were pre-meds. I was delighted and grateful to be admitted to Harvard Medical School. And Jeremy, I was on my way. I had understood by that time that God had called me to serve as a layman in the church, that I was directing the choir. I was integrated in terms of my medicine and my ministry, lay ministry. And then something quite unexpected occurred. After having attained the goal of being admitted to Harvard Medical School and doing well, loving it, the summer after my first year in medical school, God called me to preach. And it was one of the most disruptive things that ever could have happened in my life, because that sophomore who thought I was a stuck-up little guy from Nashville, Tennessee, who herself finished Harvard the year before I did, and to whom I had then become engaged, had said that there were two kinds of people she'd never marry because in her experience, they never seemed to have time for their families, physicians and preachers. And she'd gotten over the doctor part because, of course, my charm had won her over. But that summer after my first year in medical school, when I told her God had called me to preach, she took the ring off her finger, gave it back to me, broke the engagement, terribly disruptive. I was confused. I had lost the love of my life, the one I thought God had prepared for me. And then I did not know whether the intention was for me to drop out of medical school and to pursue ministry. And it took me several months to recognize that what God was calling me to was this dual profession and career of medicine and ministry. And so, Jeremy, I spent the last 3 years at Harvard Medical School convincing my academic advisors that I didn't have to choose. Dr. Eugene Braunwald, an extraordinary Harvard cardiologist, said, Ken, at some point you're going to have to decide whether you're going to be a preacher or a physician. I said, Dr. Braunwald, I don't think so. I ended up entering one of the first primary care residencies at Beth Israel Hospital in Boston because I knew I wanted a primary care practice that was much more holistic, saw the whole person. Certainly, I could have been a pulmonologist or a cardiologist or a gastroenterologist. I wanted to be a primary care internal medicine physician. And while I was a resident at Beth Israel Hospital, I explored this interrelationship between faith and medicine by looking at substance abuse, which really, when you know about addiction, it is about the whole person. It's about the body, the soul, the mind, the will, and the spirit. And my patients in my clinic as a resident came from two cohorts of individuals in Boston. Concentration camp survivors. I was at Beth Israel Hospital, who struggled often with substance abuse, and retired Catholic priest. I was in Boston, priest who often struggled with substance abuse. And so my life began early on in this dual career to be functionally interrelated between the calling, the ministerial side of my life, and the medicine to which I had aspired and trained and had marvelous opportunities to grow and develop.
What's interesting is, I think, especially here in Memphis, you don't think about the separation. Like you look at your story, Scott Morris, Dr. Morris, like right. The intertwining, and even, Keith Norman, like there's so many that I can think of. The healing, teaching, preaching, like faith and medicine are intertwined. And when you think about body, mind, spirit, like all of these things, to me, they go together. But as you're talking about, I can easily see where
45 years ago.
Yeah.
45 years ago, when it was very much cutting edge and very much in many ways not appreciated and not accepted. And so it is different. In fact, there was a gentleman at Harvard Medical School who had begun to explore this body and soul and mind, and they almost thought Herb Benson was a quack back in those days. I just had my 45th medical school reunion, and the evolution, yes, Jeremy, of that natural intersection has occurred over the last 4.5 decades. And back in those days, as old as I am, that was unconventional and quite innovative. And yet I was clear whether or not anyone ever understood what I was doing, that I was called to do it. And I've been very blessed by having lived a life that I think structured by the Lord and driven by opportunities that partners have given me, that my professional ministry has provided me, that others who understood that we are tripartite individuals have allowed me to explore. It's been a good life over these 42 years of professional life.
Talk about then how you were able to reconcile with your wife, and then how that led you to Vanderbilt for your Master of Divinity.
Well, the wonderful thing is that that the Lord also spoke to her and helped me reconcile her real concerns and fears about being principal and primary in my life. And 3.5 years later, it took a moment. We came back together, decided to date again, and 8 weeks later, almost, we were married. And so we've now been married for 45 years. Our wedding was 2 days after I finished medical school. And what is even more paradoxical is that in 1991, God called her to preach. And so much of our professional life, she received a master's in public health at Yale. She's been in hospital administration. When we came to Memphis, senior vice president at St. Francis. I practiced medicine for years at Vanderbilt, but it has been wonderful. Who would have known? This is a narrative that only God could have woven together. I left Beth Israel Hospital determined to be able to affirm that if I were called to be a physician, but also called to be a minister, that I'd go back and get credentials. And I went to Vanderbilt Divinity School simultaneously as I was beginning to practice medicine at Vanderbilt University Medical Center. So I was on the faculty of the medical school, and I was a Master of Divinity student at the Divinity School. But there was no reason that I should have been more credentialed in one part of my life and not in the other. And so I was grateful for that. It was in Nashville that we began to explore the functional components of having churches embedded in the Black community, working with young people, for instance, preventing alcohol and drug abuse. This was the early 1980s. We were very, very much overwhelmed in those days by the AIDS epidemic. Many of my patients at Vanderbilt University Medical Center were patients that had no private physicians, were assigned to our division, and I cared for patient after patient who were struggling with, and those days almost uniformly dying from AIDS. But for me, you can imagine how that culminated in an even better sense of how ministry and medicine were woven together. These patients needed both of my skill sets. And I was at an institution at Vanderbilt that had the Vanderbilt Institute for the Treatment of Addictions. So I could pull on the challenges of understanding how to help people get through tough recoveries, even out of addiction, and pull on the capacity that I had as an academic physician to give the best care that we could at the time for those patients, and to even care for them holistically. At the same time, at our first church, we were starting after-school programs in the community. We were doing substance abuse programs, had our first grant from local public health and from the Federal Centers for Substance Abuse Prevention for a Black church to do substance abuse community-based work in Nashville. Very active with the CDC at that time. So again, you're beginning to see my interaction with governmental public health, and the CDC was focused on how to try to decrease the numbers and the rate of infection for AIDS in the African-American community. So early on now, 40 years ago, God placed me in positions at a time to explore how the rest of my life would become this combination of faith and health.
What's interesting too is you've been doing Driving the Dream for so long before it even really launched. So when we get to Driving the Dream in United Way of the Mid-South, like everything you're talking about is experiences building really what is driving the dream, this collaborative approach to creating transformational change in the community through networks and, other organizations working in partnership. And so I also think what's interesting is God equipping you to be able to really help, because what you're dealing with when you talk about addiction and HIV and those are heavy topics, and losing patients, equipping to be able to really help them, but also to be able to help yourself to be able to do that work. So I think there's also a lot in terms of God's plan and preparation for you to be equipped to truly help, which is a powerful piece of this storyline as well. Carry that into then, let's kind of switch over into public policy and your work with the governor's cabinet as Tennessee's Commissioner of Health.
Yes, I have been undaunted and unchanged. My good friend Scott Morris has that if you've seen me in one decade, you've seen me in another. If you've seen me in one seat, in one profession, in one position, I am pretty much a one-note individual, because it is about advancing people, helping people overcome their current circumstances and taking them to a new level. And when Governor Bredesen invited me, I was not in public health. I was here in Memphis at the time as an assistant dean in the College of Medicine, again, helping to clone myself, Jeremy, making African-American physicians out of this setting, the University of Tennessee College of Medicine, who would go back into communities as I was called to do and serve an underserved population. While I was doing that, Governor Bredesen remembered me from his first mayoral campaign in Nashville, and he invited me to be in his cabinet. For me, it was again about transforming the ivory tower of the health department and putting all of the weight and resources and capacity of the statewide health department back into communities. And my focus was on the kinds of things that were equally challenging all across the state in 95 counties, decreasing teenage pregnancy, decreasing obesity, and decreasing infant mortality. And so, having heard my early ramblings about my life, you can see that I was doing ministry with the resources of 3,700 employees and a $540 million budget in 95 counties, but ministering to communities, community-based participatory involvement, public health officials getting out. Guess what? Collaborating with churches so that people could get the message, understand the things that they could do to transform their lives. That's public policy. And embedding that with the capabilities of government and having the resources to actually scale that across the state was very, very important to me. And we did it, by the way, in a very bipartisan way, because what is true in Upper Cumberland and what's true in Northeast Tennessee is the same as in Nashville and Memphis around the ills and the challenges that were making our health outcomes in Tennessee so poor.
Give me one special moment that stands out. I know there's many, but whether it's the people you worked with, something that was transformational in terms of impacting the community, what's a special moment that stands out during that time period?
Yeah, there is no doubt about it. There was a front page article in the Commercial Appeal with images of scores of very small coffins. And the Commercial Appeal had done a major 3-part article about Memphis, highlighting the infant mortality rates, that the infant mortality rates were 3 times for African-American mothers and the babies that they birthed than for white mothers. And that disparity was existent even in those years that I was Commissioner of Health. And so that propelled me, and the governor allowed me and supported me to create an extraordinary initiative around the state to decrease the rates of infant mortality, because Tennessee had higher rates than the rest of the country, many other states. And then there were these pockets within the state of Tennessee where there was such great pain and suffering and disparity. So the consequences of racial and ethnic disparities around issues that, however, impacted every county in the state of Tennessee really informed what I was doing as Commissioner of Health.
Before we switch over and talk about United Way of the Mid-South, one more storyline that I want to weave in is you being pastor and CEO of St. Andrew AME Church, 25 years. So give us, a little bit, as much as you can in a snippet, give us a little bit of that experience.
Well, it's a broken record in my life. It is about helping individuals advance. It's about helping couples stay together and having positive, wonderful marriages. It's about families, the elders, as well as the youth, the parents, and the kids. It's about communities, also having hopes and dreams, but lots of issues. And we pastored there in South Memphis that was just the quintessential example of a community that had suffered from so much disinvestment. And yet the people were people of great potential and pride, musicians in that community, homeowners in that community. And St. Andrew, over those 25 years, became an engine of social change and impact in South Memphis. And there we put 20,000 pairs of shoes on the feet of kids who had worn out their summer footwear. And our teachers told us that often they were truant because their parents couldn't get new shoes. It was there that we served 30,000 meals a year as an affiliate of the Mid-South Food Bank, but in a place where there was no other distribution site. It was there that we built affordable housing for 114 families, that we started and built with the support of local communities and local foundations, a healthy grocery store with a teaching kitchen in it so that residents in South Memphis could learn how to eat more healthfully. It was there that we started the South Memphis Farmers Market. People said, no one's going to a farmers market in South Memphis. Wrong. Our vendors often said it was their highest per capita per day grossing farmers market when it was active there. It was there that we started the first charter elementary school in the state of Tennessee, because I'm my parents' child. We'd been very involved in public education here. And we recognized that for children that were failing in mainstream classrooms, and for us to have the opportunity to get a charter and focus on them, not to cream the top, but to really focus on kids that were struggling. Circles of Success Learning Academy, surrounding them with circles of support and success, help those kids. Our children who have now for 24 years come through that charter elementary school are extraordinary students. They've been recruited all over the city and recruited all over the nation. And so it's holistic approaches. That's what Driving the Dream was all about. I had the privilege of having about $23 million of development there in South Memphis as the pastor of St. Andrew. And so I was known. I was a board member at United Way. I'd been a volunteer when I went to the state. My wife became a board member here. I'm very convinced about the work of the United Way of the Mid-South. In 2000, I was named the Community Builder of the Year by United Way of America at the time. It's United Way Worldwide. So I had been very invested as a volunteer. When I was commissioner, I gave this United Way my Ryan White work to manage and administer here in Memphis. And so what I became during these years at United Way of the Mid-South should not have been a surprise to anybody, really pulling together the public sector, private philanthropy, corporate philanthropy, the extraordinary array of nonprofits in this community that are doing excellent work, but I discovered doing it pretty much in silos. It should not have been a surprise that I was going to have a heart for underserved served communities and for populations for which there were significant disparities, socioeconomic disparities, socio-health disparities. And so I was pretty excited about coming to an iconic organization that, unlike any other, stood at the intersection between business and academia and churches and philanthropy and real people, and that the history of the United Way had been to provide the opportunity for agencies and programs to provide services to real people who needed to be advanced, who needed to be served.
Talk about the similarities between the church and United Way of the Mid-South in terms of you stepping in. So obviously your leadership, the vision, the drive, the passion, the commitment, that's one major ingredient to this when you talk about success. It's also too, though, engagement and getting your team engaged and bought in and understanding how they can be change makers. And so when you look at the culture of creating these opportunities to really transform the community through the church and through United Way of the Mid-South, what are some of those parallels, the similarities that really have allowed both organizations to create transformation at a much higher level than other organizations and before?
Well, one thing, it is an enduring commitment that I brought to United Way, shared by certainly the board of United Way and others, but implemented in a different way. The commitment that I brought to articulate and then impact the realities that were facing individuals who were in one point of their lives and needed to progress to another point in their lives. It was, as we now talk about our tagline for Driving the Dream, helping people move from where they are to where they dream to be. Consistent theme, that thread you see. And so it was yet a calling. At that point, my wife and I were entering retirement from 33 years of pastoring. And really, I thought I was going to now finally, for Maryland, join her in retirement, doing neither preaching or being a physician. And yet, at that point, I was invited to take this position. Well, what you see is what you get. The chair of the board at the time was a member of the congregation at St. Andrew, an executive at FedEx. He knew what we'd done. He knew the relationships that we built. And so I brought that same orientation. Yes, at that point, we were serving and funding scores of high-performing organizations that were doing excellent work. They were creating the change narratives around the things that they did extraordinarily well. But the individuals who were going in their doors and seeking and receiving those services and those high-performing agencies were not advancing. And so you're right, Jeremy, that the concept of creating something that would be the epitome of systemic change, that would really be about changing systems, that would be about building a system, a collaborative system, a collective impact system of social service agencies that were working in the communities, but who could be much more impactful and effective working together collectively in a collaborative way with those individuals who by definition had more than one problem. When we at the time have almost 200,000 people living in generational poverty in Memphis and the Mid-South, when they walk into one agency, get one service, what's the chance that they only need that one service from that one program and one agency? And when we began to ask the question, which is something in the early focus groups of individuals that have been in and out of agencies, social service, human service agencies in the community, when we ask the question, what else do you need when you walk into that one agency? Suddenly, we received that flow of information that, yes, well, thank you for this, but I really also need this and that. And this functional, collaborative, connected, integrated system of community-based organization services and programs was born, called Driving the Dream. People have dreams. My parents had dreams for me. They had assets and capabilities to help me get. People have dreams, but they have so many closed doors, so many barriers, so many potholes in front of them, so many stumbling blocks. But if we could, the concept was, if we could weave together our resources, if we could come together in this collective impact model, if we could take community members and organizations and agencies and we can amplify what we did individually in our solo and siloed agencies and do it sequentially or consecutively or simultaneously in the lives of people that needed services, who were seeking services and found them in our agencies, if we could come together, communicate about it, have some shared measurements, come together, gather with the interest of the people we were serving in mind, and say it will be mutually beneficial for us as agencies and programs, and certainly transformational in the lives of the individuals and the families we serve, if we can build this accountable network of human service agencies with a backbone of United Way. And let's say, call it Driving the Dream, that people whose dreams have been left on the vine like raisins in the sun, people who never ever thought they could attain their dreams, that they could never move, Jeremy, that they'd been stuck. We can help them move from where they are to where they dream to be.
The collective impact model, Driving the Dream, has already garnered a lot of national acclaim. You've got, you and your team sharing this model with other cities. It's generated, obviously, funding that makes it sustainable. When you look at the stats in terms of the numbers of individuals and families impacted, great success on a lot of fronts. Give us a couple of things that really put a smile on your face when you look at Driving the Dream and its ability to create transformational change, being able to move from where they are to where they dream to be. What puts a smile on your face?
It's the individuals. You will never hear me promise that Memphis will be out of poverty or that the poverty statistics will change, but it's the individual stories. It's the story of someone who really inspired me, someone who was working with me at St. Andrew many, many years ago. Single mother looking for childcare, found high quality childcare, but someone also saw in the mother a capacity for her to do more, gave her a job as a childcare attendant at the childcare center, inspired her to go back to college, went to college, got a graduate degree, not only the undergraduate, graduate degree. In that context, helped her find affordable housing, built a house for her. Her children went on to college. Then she went as a social worker and became a blessing to children in the school system. And now she is working in one of our partner agencies at Communities in Schools, served on our board. Just an extraordinary trajectory for her. Those are the stories we see over and over. It's the individual who's looking for one thing, but finds a panoply of services that can help that mother, that father, that family become elevated to excel. And we do have the data so that we ask our persons who come through one door, in the one door that then over 27,000 times has led to other doors through referrals in the Driving the Dream network. Someone who came through that one door and may have been among the 3,700 families that have now gotten advanced case management and care coordination. That person that came through one door, who may have called our Driving the Dream call center, which we stood up the month after the pandemic struck the nation, for which 17,000 people have accessed that call center. We look at that one story, and they are telling us that when they are in care coordination and case management, on a scale of 1 to 5, or the I came in crisis, and 5, I can be fully empowered and self-sufficient, they are moving 2.4 points towards self-sufficiency and empowerment through care coordination and case management of driving the dream. They are telling us, I'm certainly moving from a 1 to a 2 and a 2 to a 3 just by this wonderful set of referrals and the resources that you have provided for us in our network. 170 agencies, Jeremy, providing over 320 individual programs and services, all working together, here it is, in a united way on behalf of individuals and families.
I love it. I need like the drum. Ba-dum-bum-bum. That's awesome. I love it. So as we alluded to, you put out the public notice of retirement. So congratulations. I know that's ahead. You're nice enough to stay on until the successor is named and then serve in a consultant role. But what are you looking forward to in your next chapter?
I'm looking forward to being a husband to my wife of 45 years, the one who said she just didn't believe I would have any time for her. And we have. We've had a marvelous marriage and traveled the world and had this co-ministry together. I'm looking forward to being the adult father of my adult twin daughters who are 43 and extraordinary physicians. And you can imagine being our children. They're a little different. One is a global OBGYN who is focused on decreasing maternal mortality. The other is a neuropalliative medicine physician who has created a niche in neurology and other tertiary specialties, helping people understand how to care for the whole person, even where there are incurable diseases. One at UCLA, one at Mayo Clinic. So I want to be their dad because I'm a girl dad. They are extraordinary young physicians. And then I have 4 grandchildren whom I adore. And I hope that what my mother instilled in me, what my wife's parents instilled in her, the model that my father set for us as young children, we can still help them catch that, and that they too, in their own lives, will become extraordinary human beings. I'm excited about that. I'll be around the community. I might serve on a board or two, but I'm looking forward to imparting, but then passing the torch. At my age, there may be wisdom in there, but if you seek it, you may find less than you thought was there. But I'm looking forward to continuing to contribute in a different way, voluntary support of so many wonderful endeavors that are occurring in this community. And I think this is about systemic transformational change. The last point I would make is that what we've done at United Way of the Mid-South has been replicated. And you mentioned it, not only in other cities, but this concept that we can work together, which was not always the drum that we beat. But today, you will see more of that. And that's why you're alluding to it, Jeremy. And I would like to say that we, as an organization that's been around 100 years, that has put $850 million over our span into high-performing nonprofits, but which now is focused on individual socioeconomic advancement, that this United Way will continue to be known under new leadership as one that is touching thousands, transforming lives. I really believe that's the future of this United Way.
One more question, then we'll switch over into a lightning round, which is just short questions, short answers, fun chance to get to know you better as we wrap up. But one more question. When you look at young professionals, and really, everyone here in the Mid-South and across our nation, so many cities are struggling with how do we really step in and pour into our youth, get them on the right path, positive role modeling, mentoring and guiding, but workforce development, crime fighting, like all these issues that different cities, especially the larger ones, are faced with. One, obviously getting involved with United Way of the Mid-South, United Way in different cities. But what would you say, and I think the churches too, play a vital role in this, for individuals who want to be a part of the solution but are lost on how to do it? What advice would you give them to really step in and help create real change in their communities in a positive way?
Look for young leaders. There are individuals in this community, and we will certainly be seeking individuals who would be interested in becoming our successor at United, we look for young leaders who are not only visionary, but who are doing the work. And they're doing the work in very impactful ways. Look for that leadership and follow that leadership. Go where they're going and support what they're doing. And I say that because we will get frustrated if we think we're starting from scratch and that we have to make it up as we go along, that we've got to build the plane while we're flying it. But it is occurring in community-based organizations. There is leadership in our corporate and private foundations thinking about how to impact this community in different ways. And we have a wealth of private and corporate foundations in Memphis. It is about churches and a new generation of leaders who've had to become adaptive leaders following a pandemic that shut so many churches and completely decimated what were the norms and the structures, including of the social organizations called churches. But then listen to the people. And if anything, part of the story and the narrative of my life has been close enough to the folks, being close enough to the folks to hear their challenges, to respect them, to understand the importance of equity, that there ought never be big I's and little U's, that everybody ought to have equitable opportunity to advance, listening to their challenges, their plight, their pleas, and then coming together in community, leaders, people, preachers, prophets, pastors, corporate leaders, educators, coming together as community. It has escaped us many times in Memphis and Shelby County. And today we're in a society and in a season where there is much incivility, and we struggle to have civil engagement and civil dialogue in the public square and in private spaces and places. But you can imagine, I still have hope. I'm a preacher at heart, and one who has committed my life to working in community, not as a place, but also as an approach. I think that is yet our hope and our future. It's going to look different in Memphis than it does in any other city. We have unique challenges and unique problems and unique issues, but we also have, Jeremy, unique solutions and approaches. I wanted Driving the Dream and this United Way of the Mid-South to be a part of a unique solution with a unique approach that will have unique and unduplicated and unprecedented impact on helping people move and advance from where they are to where they dream to be. We can do this in Memphis.
Yeah, I love it. And this is exactly why you're a change maker. So awesome stuff. Let's switch over into a lightning round. So short questions, short answers, fun chance to get to know you better. What do you like to do to relax?
I take pictures. My one hobby is that I'm a travel photographer. I enjoy taking them, looking at them, and curating them.
So being a travel photographer, what's one of your favorite go-to spots outside of the Mid-South?
Oh my gosh, I've traveled to 43 countries, and now we take other people with us. Just came back from South Africa, love South Africa, and I think we could live in Cape Town if given the chance and the choice, but I'd be too far away from the kids and grandchildren.
When you have friends come to visit you here in the Mid-South, where do you like to take them?
We take them to church, and then we take them to any number of marvelous restaurants that are here, and I'll get in trouble naming them. So we find the best culinary experiences and take them there.
What's a favorite sport or thing you like to do to play and to watch, like on TV?
I'm, since its inception in Memphis, a great fan of the Memphis Grizzlies. I'm a season ticket holder, and I go to every home game, and I scream like a kid when we win, and I hurt with all the pathos of and pain when we lose. I don't play anything, but I'm a big Grizzlies fan.
As a pastor, is there a go-to sermon, or is there a go-to, like, was there ever like a go-to thing that it was always like your favorite?
Yeah. I think my go-to scripture from which I've preached in multiple iterations comes from the words of Mordecai to Esther. And he said, "Who knoweth whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this?" That epitomizes my calling. I think it's part of what should be challenging all of us to do what we're called to do in the places where we are for the time that is given to us for such a time as this.
On that same thread, what's a favorite quote or saying that inspires you? And you don't have to get it verbatim, but what's a quote or a saying that inspires you beyond that?
I'm going to turn to a biblical verse, Ephesians 4:1, which will not be surprising to anyone who knows me. It says, walk worthy of the vocation wherewith you've been called. And so you will see my license plate says called. You'll see my old AOL email address is about KSR, my initials, called. How many times have you heard me today speak about calling? I think we are called to do the work we do. And if we walk worthy according to that vocation, seems like I've had 1,000 jobs, probably because I couldn't keep one of them. But whatever the vocation and whatever seat I was sitting, whatever the appointment, whatever the role, I've sought to walk worthy according to the vocation to which I've been called. That's my favorite passage and favorite quote.
Obviously, you've learned a tremendous amount from your wife, but what's one thing that stands out to you as something that she's either done or said that's made you better? So it could be an experience, it could be something she said, advice, but what's a way that your wife has impacted you in a positive way, over the 45 plus years?
Yeah, she's been my best friend, and that is rare, but everybody needs a best friend. And in these very complicated lives that we live, high-pressured lives, not always remuneratively great lives, I've made some decisions. We haven't had a whole lot of money over the years, but she's been my best friend and giving me my best advice and walking alongside the up times and the down times, the victories and the defeats. And what she's done for me is to keep me centered and to keep me focused and to keep me loving the life that God has given me, even if at every moment over these 45 years, I couldn't even see where it was heading and where it was going. But she's been just like that. And I want to have a few more years with my best friend so that I don't live out her greatest fear, that I'd never have time for her.
Similar, but a little different. What's something you've learned from each of your daughters?
My daughters have taught me how to be called into different elements of their own medical careers and to be focused without having had the benefit of the 1960s and 70s. So I have a perspective as an African American of my vintage that they did not have. And yet I've learned how they have synthesized what's happening in the nation and in the world. And then they've integrated that in their own unique way. And that's really all we can expect of each other, right? My experiences, Jeremy, will not have been yours. But however we get it and can filter it and sift it, and they've done that marvelously. They would not say they were called to preaching ministry, But even they, at 43, and the extraordinary men that they've married, would say they've been called to do medicine in a way that is much more holistic, much more sensitive and responsive to the needs of the individuals and the families that they serve and the communities in which they do it. They look very different from me. Their trajectory, very different from mine. Their impact, may I say, as a proud father, very similar, and it will outstrip anything that I've done. No one will ever remember me. I'll always be known only as Maisha and Nuria's dad. And I'm good with that.
Well, the whole time I'm thinking I would love just to sit there like a fly on the wall to Scrabble night, and then also do just the conversations around the table with you and your family. Just amazing stuff. So
Rich, it's been a lot of fun, and I am looking forward to this season. I hope to remain relevant, and those who are watching, I trust that I'm around, but probably on a much more individual basis, sharing some of that background and some of that wisdom and some of my own hopes and aspirations. I worry, as you alluded to earlier, a little bit about where we are today in our society and where we're heading. There is some darkness, I think, encroaching upon all of the bright work that is being done. And I think that for those of us who are global citizens, who are citizens of this country, who are citizens of our communities, we've got to stay connected, and we've got to strive for community. I'll be there somewhere in the wings, fly on the wall, not doing what I've been doing, enjoying my family, but I'll stay connected.
Well, this will wrap us up, but you've created such an impressive legacy and obviously transformational change. When you look at many, many years from now, because you're still crafting and creating your legacy each and every day, what do you hope that people say about you and the difference that you were able to make here on earth?
I hope people will say that he did what he was called to do, that he was obedient, regardless of the cost at any given point in time, to the call upon his life. And that by living that calling, lives have been changed, people have been saved, communities have been improved, and in some small part, God used him to help people move from where they are to where they dream to be.
Well, where can we go to follow you in your efforts to remain connected? So obviously we can go to United Way of the Mid-South, to the website there to get plugged in and continue the journey with Driving the Dream. But where can we go to stay connected with you?
I may be a little bit more active in the coming months and years on Facebook. These days, you'll see a lot about United Way, but you also see a lot about my family. So reach out to social media. I have a little presence on X, formerly known as Twitter. I might be able to share a few more of my travel photos on Instagram. So social media will be where I'll hang out and just say hi to the old guy every now and then.
Well, Dr. Kenneth Robinson, you are a change maker indeed. Thank you for all you've done and will continue to do to create transformational change here in our community. So greatly appreciate everything you've done, everything you'll continue to do. Thank you for being a change maker and coming on the ChangeMakers Podcast.
Thank you, Jeremy, for the opportunity. Appreciate you and all you're doing.
Higginbotham Insurance and Financial Services is proud to power the ChangeMakers Podcast. We're a people-first company that protects what matters most, the families, businesses, and trailblazers that keep our community going. As one of the nation's top independent insurance firms, Higginbotham is a single-source solution for business insurance, employee benefits, HR services, and personal insurance that's customized for you. We're here to serve you, the people you care about, and your community. Call 866-377-1959 or visit higginbotham.com.
Thank you for listening to the ChangeMakers Podcast, produced by City Current and powered by Higginbotham Insurance and Financial Services.
To learn more, to listen to past episodes, and to share your stories of other changemakers who are making a difference, visit citycurrent.com or call 901-321-1020.
Follow the conversation online using the handle @CityCurrent or the hashtag #PowerTheGood.